Death has a way of bringing out the worst in families. I learned this standing in Aunt Clara's study. Watching her lawyer shuffle papers while my sister-in-law Samantha drummed her perfectly manicured nails against the mahogany desk. The sound made my teeth ache. My name is Lila, and until today, I thought I understood my place in the Morrison family hierarchy, somewhere between the household help and a particularly tolerated stray cat. But Aunt Clara, even in death, had other ideas. Are we quite ready to begin? Samantha's voice cut through the silence. She straightened her designer blazer, a gesture I'd seen her perform countless times before delivering bad news to subordinates at her marketing firm. The lawyer, Mr. Phillips, adjusted his glasses. Just waiting for Henry to join us. Henry? Samantha's fingers stopped their drumming. What's he doing here? He hasn't spoken to the family in years. As if summoned, Henry appeared in the doorway, his presence sending a ripple through the room. My husband Mason shifted beside me, his hand finding mine beneath the table. A gesture of support, or perhaps a request for it. Now then, Mr. Phillips began, let us proceed with the reading of Clara Morrison's last will and testament. I tried to focus on the legal jargon, but my mind kept drifting to my last conversation with Clara. She'd invited me for tea, insisted on using her prized vintage teapot collection. Sometimes, she'd said, the most valuable things aren't what they appear to be. The lawyer's voice snapped me back to attention. To my niece Samantha, I leave my collection of vintage teapots. Samantha's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. The teapots? That's it? And to Lila, Mr. Phillips continued, I leave my technology patents, including all associated rights and royalties. The room went silent. Then exploded. This is absurd. Samantha shot to her feet. Those patents are worth millions. She's not even blood family. Mason's grip on my hand tightened. Sam, please. Don't Sam me, Mason. Your little librarian wife has somehow manipulated our aunt. This will is obviously invalid. Henry cleared his throat. Actually, Clara was quite clear about her decisions. Wasn't she, Mr. Phillips? The lawyer nodded. The will is legally binding and explicitly states these wishes were made of sound mind. I sat there, numb with shock. The patents. Clara's life's work. Her legacy. Why me? I won't accept this, Samantha hissed. You've been plotting this, haven't you? All those little visits, playing the devoted niece-in-law. What did you do, poison her mind against me? That's enough. Mason stood up, but his voice lacked conviction. I found my voice, surprising myself with its steadiness. I had no idea about any of this, Samantha. Clara never. Oh, spare me your innocent act. She turned to Mason. Your wife has been manipulating this family since day one. First Clara, now you. When will you see it? Mason's silence spoke volumes. I suggest we take a moment to process this, Mr. Phillips intervened. There are other matters to discuss. But Samantha was already storming out, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors like angry exclamation points. Mason hesitated, caught between following his sister and staying with me. He chose neither, mumbling something about getting air before leaving the room. Henry approached my chair. Don't let her intimidate you. Clara knew exactly what she was doing. I looked up at him, searching for answers in his expression. Did she tell you about this? Clara told me many things. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And I think you'll find there's more to this inheritance than just patents. As I sat there, surrounded by Clara's books and belongings, I realized this wasn't just an inheritance, it was a match being struck. And Samantha's reaction suggested she knew exactly what kind of fire it could start. I just hadn't figured out yet if I was meant to be the flame or the moth. The Morrison family mansion felt like a museum of carefully curated resentments. I wandered through the post-funeral gathering, clutching a glass of wine I hadn't touched. Watching Mason disappear into his father's study with Samantha. The door clicked shut behind them with quiet finality. 3 hours had passed since the will reading, and my husband hadn't spoken more than 10 words to me. Each time I caught his eye, he'd look away, as if the weight of my inheritance was too heavy to bear. They're quite the picture of family unity, aren't they? Henry appeared beside me, nodding toward the study door. Samantha always did know how to command an audience. I set my untouched wine on a nearby table. She's his sister. Of course they need to talk. About you mean? Henry's smile didn't match his eyes. About how to handle the unfortunate situation of the librarian who dared to inherit Clara's legacy. Through the study's stained glass windows, I could see their silhouettes. Samantha's arms moved in sharp, decisive gestures while Mason's shoulders slumped further with each passing minute. You know, Henry continued, Clara kept detailed records of everything. Every conversation, every decision. Every betrayal. Before I could ask what he meant, the study door swung open. Mason emerged first, looking worn and defeated. Samantha followed, triumph radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Darling, she called out, voice dripping with false sweetness. We need to discuss something as a family. I stepped forward, but Mason wouldn't meet my eyes. The patents, he said, voice hollow. We think it would be best if you sign them over to the family trust. The room went quiet. Even the distant chatter of other mourners seemed to fade away. The family trust. I repeated the words, testing their weight. You mean Samantha's control? It's what's best for everyone, Samantha interjected. You can't possibly understand the complexities of managing such valuable assets. We're trying to protect you. Protect me? The laugh that escaped me didn't sound like my own. Like you protected Clara? Samantha's perfectly composed expression cracked, just for a moment. What exactly are you implying? Nothing, Mason cut in quickly. Lila, please. This doesn't have to be difficult. Actually, Henry spoke up, I think Clara would find this fascinating. The family rallying to protect her wishes by completely ignoring them. Stay out of this, Samantha snapped. You lost any right to an opinion when you disappeared for 15 years. Did I disappear, Sam? Or was I pushed? The tension in the room shifted, like a current changing direction. Samantha's fingers twitched toward her phone, her usual gesture when she felt control slipping away. Mason, I said quietly, is this what you want? He finally looked at me, conflict written across his face. I want peace in my family. Is that so wrong? Peace? I gestured around the room. This isn't peace. This is surrender. How dare you? Samantha stepped between us. You waltz into this family, charm our aunt with your little library stories and humble attitude, and now you're going to lecture us about family? I didn't waltz anywhere. I married a man I love, who used to love me enough to stand up to bullies. Even when they were his own sister. Mason flinched as if I'd slapped him. Lila, that's not fair. No? I turned to leave, then paused. Clara told me something once. She said the true measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals, but in how they handle having power over others. I wonder what she'd make of this moment. Is that a threat? Samantha called after me. I looked back over my shoulder. No, Samantha. Just an observation. And a promise, I will honor Clara's wishes. All of them. As I walked away, Henry fell into step beside me. You know, he said quietly, Clara left you more than just patents. She left you a key. A key to what? His smile was enigmatic. To the truth. The question is, are you ready to use it? Behind us, I could hear Samantha's voice rising, already spinning this confrontation into another example of my betrayal. But for the first time since the will reading, I felt steady. Clara had chosen me for a reason, and I was done playing the grateful outsider in a family that never wanted me. It was time to show them exactly why Clara had trusted me with her legacy. The key Henry mentioned turned out to be literal, a small brass thing hidden inside one of Clara's vintage teapots. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood in her study at midnight, hands shaking as I tried different drawers in her antique desk. Mason hadn't come home after the funeral gathering. Staying at the club, his text read. 3 words that said everything about where we stood. The key finally caught in the bottom drawer's lock. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages stuffed with loose photographs and newspaper clippings. The first entry was dated 15 years ago. I see Samantha has begun her campaign early, Clara's elegant script read. Today she suggested I'm becoming forgetful. Convenient timing, just as the new patents are being finalized. My phone buzzed, another message from Mason. We need to talk about the patents. Sam's lawyer drafted papers. I ignored it, turning pages until a photograph slipped out. A younger Samantha stood beside Clara at some corporate event, but it was the man in the background that caught my eye. Henry, watching them both with an expression I couldn't quite read. Found what you're looking for? I jumped, nearly dropping the journal. Henry stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the hallway light. You knew about this, I said, holding up the journal. I knew Clara kept records. He stepped into the room. I knew because I helped her gather them, before Samantha pushed me out. What happened? Same thing that's happening to you now. I saw too much, knew too much. Samantha doesn't like witnesses to her methods. A new entry caught my eye. Henry tried to warn me about the contract changes. Samantha claims he's unstable, jealous of her position. The board believes her, she's always been convincing. But I'm starting to see the pattern. She tried to take control of the company, I said, pieces clicking into place. Tried and failed. Clara was smarter than she looked. But the attempt cost me my reputation, my place in the family. Henry's laugh was bitter. Samantha's quite skilled at character assassination. My phone buzzed again. Samantha, this time, Mason tells me you're being difficult about the patents. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Why did Clara leave me the patents? I asked, looking up at Henry. Why not you? Because I was compromised. But you're different. You see through people's masks. Just like Clara did. A creak in the hallway made us both freeze. Footsteps approached, then Samantha's voice, the lights on in Clara's study. Henry moved quickly, taking the journal from my hands. Back door. Go. I'll handle this. I slipped out just as Samantha entered, but couldn't resist pausing to listen. Well, Samantha's voice dripped contempt. The prodigal cousin returns to steal more family secrets? Just paying respects, Sam. Something you might try sometime. Oh, I respected Clara. Right up until she lost her mind and left her legacy to that gold-digging librarian. Careful, Sam. Your mask is slipping. Like you slipped? Telling Clara those lies about me? Ancient history now, but still, some might wonder why you've suddenly reappeared. Some might wonder why you're so desperate to control those patents. A sharp laugh. Please. I'm protecting our family's interests. Unlike some people, I understand loyalty. Loyalty? Henry's voice hardened. Is that what you call what you did to Clara? To me? I did what was necessary. And I'll do it again if I have to. I backed away, heart pounding. In my pocket, my phone buzzed one more time. Mason, Sam's lawyer, says we can contest the will. Prove Clara wasn't competent. Please don't make me choose sides. But that's exactly what this was about, wasn't it? Sides. Power. Control. Clara had seen it all coming, documented every move in her elegant handwriting. As I drove home, Henry's words echoed in my mind. Clara was smarter than she looked. The patents weren't just an inheritance, they were ammunition. And Samantha knew it. The question was, what else was hidden in that journal? And how far would Samantha go to keep those secrets buried? One thing was certain, I wasn't the only one who'd been underestimated in this family. Clara had played a longer game than any of us realized. Now I just had to figure out how to win it. The cafe where I met Vivian felt too bright, too normal for the weight of Clara's journal in my bag. My friend stirred her coffee with practiced patience while I struggled to find the right words. He hasn't come home in 3 days, I finally said. Mason's staying at his club, avoiding my calls. And Samantha's lawyer? Vivian leaned forward, lawyer mode activated. What exactly did the papers say? I wouldn't know. I haven't signed for the certified mail. I pulled out my phone, showing her the latest message from Mason. Sam's filing the competency challenge tomorrow. Last chance. They're desperate, Vivian mused. But why? The patents are valuable, sure, but Samantha's already wealthy. There has to be more. My fingers traced the edge of Clara's journal. There is. Henry showed me. The cafe door chimed. Samantha walked in, designer heels clicking against tile. Our eyes met, and her red lips curved into something adjacent to a smile. What a delightful surprise, she said, approaching our table. Plotting your next move? Having coffee, I replied. Would you like to join us? How civil. She pulled up a chair uninvited. I actually hoped I'd run into you. There's something you should know about Henry. I'm not interested in. He's been in contact with our competitors. She placed a folder on the table. Phone records, emails. All very interesting timing, don't you think? Right after Clara's death? I didn't touch the folder. Like the timing of your competency challenge? I'm protecting our family's interests. Henry's protecting his bank account. She leaned back, studying me. Did he tell you why he left 15 years ago? What really happened with those early patents? You mean when you framed him? Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe fear. Is that what Clara's little diary says? You should fact-check your sources, dear. Starting with this. She slid another document across the table. A police report from 15 years ago. Henry's name jumped out, along with words like corporate espionage and settlement. People aren't always what they seem, Samantha said softly. Even Clara knew that, in the end. After she left, Vivian let out a long breath. Well, that was a warning, I finished. But for who? Me or Henry? Both, maybe. Vivian tapped the police report. Want me to look into this? My phone buzzed again. Henry, need to meet. Important. Come alone. No, I decided. I need to handle this myself. That evening, I sat in our empty house, Clara's journal open beside the documents Samantha provided. The truth was in here somewhere, hidden between competing narratives and family loyalty. A key turned in the front door. Mason stepped in, looking tired and uncertain. You're home, I said. Samantha showed me the evidence about Henry. He sat heavily across from me. Why didn't you tell me you were meeting with him? Why didn't you tell me you were helping Samantha investigate him? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I found something else, Mason finally said. In Clara's old records. The patents, they're not just valuable, they're dangerous. In the wrong hands. Define wrong hands. Lila, please. Just sign the papers. Let the family handle this. I opened Clara's journal to the last entry, dated a week before her death. The truth isn't in what we hide, but in why we hide it. Choose wisely, dear one. I can't, I told Mason. Clara trusted me with this for a reason. Then you've made your choice. He stood up, wedding ring catching the light as he reached for his keys. I hope it's worth it. After he left, I texted Henry, meeting tomorrow. Bring proof. The reply came instantly, already did. Check the journal's binding. There, carefully hidden in the leather spine, was a small USB drive. Clara's final secret, waiting to be revealed. Whatever truth it contained would change everything. The question was, would I be strong enough to face it? And more importantly, would my marriage survive the fallout? Only one way to find out. The USB drive's contents spilled across my laptop screen like digital poison. Financial records, emails, surveillance photos, 15 years of carefully documented betrayal. My hands shook as I scrolled through proof of what Samantha had done, not just to Henry, but to Clara's company. Patent theft. Corporate espionage. Forged signatures. My phone lit up with a news alert. Morrison Tech announces leadership changes, Samantha Morrison named interim CEO. The timing wasn't coincidental. Nothing in this family ever was. I arrived at the Morrison Tech building just as Samantha was finishing her press conference. Camera flashes caught her triumphant smile as she shook hands with board members. Quite the performance, I said when the reporters cleared out. She turned, smile never wavering. Lila. Coming to congratulate me? Coming to understand why you're so desperate for those patents. Desperate? She laughed. I'm CEO now. I don't need to be desperate. You need them because they prove what you did. I held up my phone, displaying one of Clara's archived emails. You stole the original designs. That's why you framed Henry, he found out. The mask slipped, just for a moment. Where did you get that? The same place I got proof that Clara was gathering evidence against you. Right up until she died. Careful, Samantha's voice dropped low. Accusations like that could be considered slander. And now that I'm CEO, the company's lawyers are already looking into the original patent applications. Henry's voice cut in. He stepped out of the elevator, holding a leather briefcase. Hello, Sam. Been a while. Samantha's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palm. Security. They're busy, Henry said. Something about federal investigators in the lobby? I watched the color drain from her face. You didn't. I didn't, I said. Clara did. Everything was in her files, waiting for the right moment. The patents weren't just valuable, were they? They were proof. Mason will never forgive you for this, she hissed. Actually, Mason's voice came from behind us. I already knew. We all turned. My husband stood there, holding a familiar vintage teapot, the one Clara had left to Samantha. Found this in your office, Sam, he said quietly. Along with Clara's original designs. The ones you claimed were lost. Samantha's composure cracked. You went through my office? Clara told me where to look. Right before she died. His eyes met mine. I'm sorry, Lila. I couldn't tell you until we had proof. Understanding hit like a physical blow. You were working with Clara? She needed someone on the inside. Someone Samantha trusted. He set the teapot down carefully. I couldn't let you sign those papers. Not when we were so close. Samantha lunged for the elevator, but security was already there. Real security this time, along with several serious-looking men in suits. Miss Morrison? One stepped forward. We need to ask you some questions about certain financial irregularities. As they led her away, she turned back to me. You think this makes you family? You'll always be an outsider. Always. No, I said. I'm exactly who Clara knew I would be. The one person who could see the truth without family loyalty blinding them. Later, in Clara's study, Mason showed me one final letter. She wrote this for you, he said. For after everything was done. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Inside, Clara's elegant script filled a single page. Dear Lila. Sometimes justice wears a mask of revenge, but the truth is simpler. I chose you because you understand that family isn't about blood or loyalty, it's about courage. The courage to stand against wrong, even when it wears a familiar face. The patents are yours, truly yours. But my real legacy is the truth you helped uncover. Take care of them all, even Samantha. She'll need guidance when this is over. With love and trust. Clara. I looked up at Mason, at Henry, at the shattered remains of family secrets finally exposed to light. What now? Mason asked softly. I picked up one of Clara's teapots, examining my reflection in its polished surface. Now we rebuild. The right way this time. The truth had cost us dearly, but Clara was right, it was worth the price. The Morrison family's summer house loomed against the twilight sky, its windows dark except for one, the library where Henry waited. I clutched Clara's USB drive, each step up the wooden porch feeling like a countdown to something inevitable. Henry stood at Clara's old desk, spreading documents across its surface. You're late. Samantha's lawyers froze my accounts. I set my phone on the desk, displaying the email from my bank. They're claiming I coerced Clara into changing her will. They're desperate. Henry sorted through the papers. But that's not why I called you here. Look at these. The documents were old, yellowed at the edges. Design sketches, early patents, all bearing Clara's signature, and another I didn't recognize. That's my father's signature, Henry said quietly. He and Clara were partners before Samantha pushed him out. Before the accident. Accident? A floorboard creaked behind us. There was nothing accidental about it. Samantha stood in the doorway, holding something that caught the lamplight, a gun. How did you, I started. Get out of custody? She stepped into the room. Money talks. And family connections walk. Put the documents down, Henry. He didn't move. They'll find you. Eventually. But first, we're going to have a family meeting. She gestured with the gun. Sit down, both of you. We sat. My phone lay just out of reach, its screen dark. 15 years, Samantha said, I've protected this family's legacy. Kept us relevant. Profitable. And you want to throw it all away for what? Justice? You killed my father, Henry's voice cracked. He was going to expose everything. The stolen designs, the offshore accounts. Just like Clara was planning to. She smiled thinly. History repeats. My fingers inched toward the phone. Don't, Samantha warned. Mason's already on his way. He'll want to say goodbye to his wife properly. Mason wouldn't. Mason does what's necessary for family. Always has. She picked up one of the documents. Clara never understood that. She thought business was about innovation, progress. It's about power. Control. You're wrong, I said. Clara understood perfectly. That's why she left everything to me. And look how well that worked out. Samantha's laugh was brittle. The patents are being transferred back to the company as we speak. Your little evidence cache? Inadmissible in court. Amazing what good lawyers can accomplish. Headlights swept across the windows. Car doors slammed. Right on time, Samantha smiled. But when the library door opened, it wasn't Mason who stepped through. It was Vivian, flanked by federal agents. Actually, Vivian said, you're the one right on time. We got everything on tape. Samantha's mask cracked. The gun wavered. Drop it, an agent ordered. For a moment, I thought she would. Then she turned the gun toward me. This is your fault. You and Clara, thinking you could change things. Some people don't deserve redemption. The gunshot was deafening. I waited for pain, for darkness. Instead, I heard a choked gasp. Samantha staggered, red blooming across her shoulder. Behind her, Mason stood in the doorway, his service weapon raised, the one I never knew he carried. I'm sorry, Sam, he said softly. It's over. As the agents moved in, I noticed something fall from Samantha's jacket, a small key, identical to the one that had opened Clara's drawer. Henry picked it up, examining it in the lamplight. There's more, isn't there? More evidence? Clara never kept everything in one place, I realized. She knew someone might find the USB drive. Smart woman, Vivian said, helping me up. But we've got enough here for federal charges. Multiple counts. I watched them lead Samantha away, her designer suit stained with blood. She didn't look back. Mason approached slowly, holstering his weapon. Lila, don't. I stepped back. Just don't. The truth had saved us, but at what cost? My marriage, my faith in family, my belief in redemption, all lay shattered like the trust Clara had placed in me. As dawn broke over the summer house, I stood in Clara's library, surrounded by the wreckage of secrets finally brought to light. The victory felt hollow, tasting of ashes and regret. Some legacies, it seemed, were built on bones. The prison visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Samantha sat across from me, orange jumpsuit stark against her pale skin, shoulder bandaged where Mason's bullet had struck. The guard stood just out of earshot. Come to gloat? Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual polish. I placed Clara's last teapot on the metal table between us. Come to return this. Her eyes fixed on the delicate porcelain. Clara's favorite. The one she used for important conversations. Like the one she had with your father the night he died? Samantha's fingers twitched. You found the recording. In the teapot's false bottom. Clara knew you'd never look there. I traced the pot's gilded edge. She recorded everything that night. Your father threatening to expose the patent theft. You offering him a deal. The argument on the stairs. You have no idea what he would have destroyed. Her mask slipped, revealing something raw beneath. Everything we built. Everything you stole. I leaned forward. Including Henry's inheritance. His father's shares. The original patents. I protected this family. You destroyed it. And Clara knew. That's why she chose me, someone who could see the truth without family loyalty blinding them. Samantha's laugh was bitter. And look what that truth cost you. Mason. The company. Your perfect little life. Mason made his choice. The words hurt less than they should. Just like Clara did. Just like I did. What choice? To destroy me? I pulled out an envelope. To save you. She stared at it. What is this? Clara's last letter to you. The real one, not the fake you had your lawyers plant. I slid it across the table. Read it. Her hands shook as she opened it. I watched her face change as she read, pride crumbling like a mask too long worn. My dearest Samantha, she read aloud, voice breaking. By now you know everything has changed. But this was never about punishment. It was about freedom. The freedom I never had the courage to give you. She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. Freedom from what? From the legacy that poisoned you. The need for control that destroyed your father, that almost destroyed Clara. I tapped the teapot. She saw herself in you. The ambition, the fear, the desperate need to prove yourself worthy. She pitied me? She loved you. Enough to stop you before you went too far. Enough to make sure the truth came out while there was still a chance for redemption. Samantha's fingers traced Clara's signature. Why are you really here, Lila? Because Clara left me more than patents. She left me a choice. I pulled out another document. The company shares. They're still mine, legally. I can keep them, rebuild without you. Or. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Or I can help you rebuild yourself. Starting with the truth about Henry's father. All of it. They'll add years to my sentence. Yes. But when you get out, you'll be free. Really free. I stood up. Clara believed in second chances. So do I. But they have to be earned. Samantha looked at the teapot, the letter, the choice lying between us like a bridge or a blade. Why, she whispered. After everything I did? Because revenge isn't justice. And justice isn't about destroying people, it's about giving them the chance to change. I left the teapot with her. As the guard led her away, she paused. I never hated you, you know. I hated what you represented. The chance I never took to be different. It's not too late. She nodded once, clutching Clara's letter like a lifeline. The door closed behind her with a final click. Outside, Mason waited by his car. Is it done? Yes. I handed him my ring. All of it. As I walked away, I felt lighter. Clara had known all along, sometimes the greatest revenge is refusing to let hatred win. Sometimes justice wears the face of mercy. And sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons or words, but with the courage to choose a different path. The Clara Morrison Technology Scholarship announcement drew more press than I'd expected. Cameras flashed as I approached the podium, the morning sun streaming through the university's glass atrium. In the front row, Henry sat beside Vivian, both offering encouraging smiles. Clara Morrison believed in second chances, I began, my voice steady despite the memories threatening to overwhelm me. In the power of knowledge to transform lives. Today, we honor that belief by offering opportunities to those who might otherwise be overlooked. The first scholarship would go to a young woman from the juvenile detention center where Samantha was serving her sentence. A choice that had raised eyebrows among the board members, but felt right in ways I couldn't fully explain. After the ceremony, I found Henry in Clara's old office, now mine, examining the row of vintage teapots lining the shelves. Samantha asked about you, he said quietly. In her last letter. And? She's teaching coding classes. To other inmates. He picked up the teapot I'd left with her, now returned. Sometimes the student becomes the teacher. I touched the patent certificates framed on the wall, Clara's originals, finally restored to their rightful place. Have you told Mason about the expansion plans? He'll find out with everyone else. Some distances can't be bridged. The door opened, and Vivian entered with a stack of files. They're ready for the board meeting. Are you sure about this? I nodded, gathering the proposals I'd spent months preparing. The company's future, reimagined as Clara might have wanted, focused on innovation, education, and second chances. Including a rehabilitation program for white-collar offenders, starting with one particular inmate. It won't be easy, Vivian warned. Some people will say you're being naive. Maybe. I picked up Clara's favorite teapot, the one that had started everything. Inside, I'd found one final note that morning: the true measure of justice isn't in the punishment we deliver, but in the healing we enable. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. These men and women had known Clara, had watched Samantha's rise and fall, had questioned my right to be here. Now they waited to see what legacy I would build from the ashes of the old. I placed Clara's teapot on the table, its familiar presence grounding me. Before we begin, I want to tell you a story about two women who loved the same family in very different ways. About how the truth can wound and heal in equal measure. And about why sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads us home. As I spoke, I saw understanding dawn in their eyes. This wasn't just about patents or profits anymore. It was about transformation of a company, a family, and ourselves. Later, alone in the office, I opened Clara's journal one last time. A photograph fell out, Clara and Samantha at a company party years ago, both smiling genuine smiles. On the back, Clara had written, "The past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. Remember that, dear one, when the time comes to choose between what's easy and what's right." My phone lit up with a message from the prison administrator. Samantha's students had completed their first coding project. A simple program that turned text into poetry. Her message read, "They're learning to see beauty in the patterns. Like Clara taught me, too late." I placed the photograph back in the journal and locked it away. Some stories don't end with neat resolutions or perfect justice. They end with small steps towards something better, with the courage to keep walking even when the path ahead is unclear. Outside my window, the city stretched toward the horizon, full of possibilities and second chances. Clara had known all along, true legacy isn't in the things we leave behind, but in the changes we inspire in others. The teapot sat empty on my desk, waiting for new conversations, new beginnings. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own choices between revenge and redemption. But for now, this was enough, this quiet moment of understanding that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the battle, but in choosing which battles are worth fighting.
My name is Melissa, and I grew up in a typical middle-class family. Mom worked as a nurse, and Dad was a mechanic. We weren't rich, but we had enough to get by comfortably. After graduating from college with a degree in education, I landed a job at a public elementary school in my hometown. My days were filled with lesson plans, finger paintings, and the infectious laughter of children. One Friday evening, my best friend Sarah insisted I join her for a party. Reluctantly, I agreed. I threw on a simple blue dress and headed to the address Sarah had texted me. The party was in full swing when I arrived, the small apartment packed with people I didn't know. "Melissa," Sarah's voice cut through the noise. She appeared at my side, grinning widely. "I'm so glad you came. There's someone I want you to meet." Before I could protest, she was dragging me through the crowd. We stopped in front of a tall, handsome man with dark hair and warm brown eyes. "Melissa, this is Jack," Sarah said, practically beaming. "Jack, meet my best friend, Melissa." Jack smiled and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Melissa. Sarah's told me a lot about you." We fell into an easy conversation about my job, his work as a software developer, and our shared love of old movies. Before I knew it, hours had passed, and the party was winding down. As I was getting ready to leave, Jack approached me. "I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, Melissa. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" My heart skipped a beat. "I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We exchanged numbers, and I left the party feeling giddy. The next day, I woke up to a text from Jack. "Good morning, Melissa. How about that coffee? Are you free this afternoon?" I replied quickly, and we made plans to meet at a local cafe. That coffee date was the beginning of something special. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I saw each other regularly. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, and took long walks in the park. With each date, I felt myself falling for him more and more. One evening, about a month after we met, Jack took me to a fancy restaurant for dinner. As we finished our meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Melissa," he said, his eyes serious. "I really like you. I was wondering if you'd like to be my girlfriend?" My heart soared. "Yes, Jack. I'd love to be your girlfriend." Jack was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, funny, and supportive. One evening, as we cuddled on my couch watching an old black and white film, I turned to Jack. "Have you told your parents about us?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Jack's body tensed slightly. "Not yet," he replied, his eyes fixed on the TV screen. "I haven't found the right moment. I'll tell them when the time is right." I wanted to press the issue, but something in Jack's demeanor made me hold back. Instead, I snuggled closer to him, pushing my concerns to the back of my mind. The next week, I invited Jack to dinner at my parents' house. Mom and Dad had been asking to meet him for weeks, and I was excited for them to get to know the man I was falling in love with. "Mom, Dad, this is Jack," I said, beaming as we walked into the living room. My parents welcomed Jack warmly. Mom had prepared her famous pot roast, and we all sat down to a lovely meal. The conversation flowed easily, with Jack charming my parents with stories about his work and his travels. The evening ended on a high note, with my parents pulling me aside as Jack went to get our coats. "He's wonderful, honey," Mom whispered, giving me a hug. "We're so happy for you." As Jack and I drove home, I couldn't help but bring up the subject of his parents again. "Jack, why haven't you introduced me to your family yet? Are you ashamed of me?" Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Of course not, Melissa. It's just, my parents can be a bit difficult. I want to make sure the timing is right." I sighed, not entirely satisfied with his answer, but decided to let it go for now. Our relationship continued to grow stronger over the next year and a half. Yet, the issue of his parents remained a sore spot. Every time I brought it up, Jack would find a way to change the subject or make light of the situation. I tried to be patient, to trust that he had his reasons, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, everything changed. Jack proposed to me at the restaurant, and I agreed to the sound of applause from other customers. On the drive home, still giddy with excitement, I turned to Jack. "I can't wait to tell my parents. They're going to be so thrilled." Jack smiled, but I noticed a hint of tension in his expression. "Actually, Mel, I think it's time you met my parents. How about we go see them this weekend?" I was surprised by the sudden change of heart, but delighted nonetheless. "Really? That would be wonderful, Jack." When we pulled up to Jack's childhood home, I couldn't help but gasp. The house was enormous, a sprawling mansion with manicured lawns and a fountain in the circular driveway. In the parking area, I spotted 3 luxury cars that probably cost more than my yearly salary. "Jack," I whispered, my eyes wide. "You never told me your family was, well, rich." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "It never seemed important. Come on, let's go in." As we approached the front door, it swung open to reveal a statuesque woman with perfectly coiffed hair and an expensive-looking suit. "Jack, darling," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. Her eyes fell on me, and I saw a flicker of something, disappointment, cross her face. "And you must be Melissa," she said, her tone noticeably cooler. "I'm Victoria, Jack's mother. Please, come in." We followed her into a lavish living room where Jack's father, Richard, was waiting. He greeted us warmly, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "So, you're the young lady who's stolen our Jack's heart," he said with a smile. Victoria gestured for us to sit and then began her interrogation. "So, Melissa, tell us about yourself. What do you do for a living?" "I'm a teacher at Jefferson Elementary," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I teach 3rd grade." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "A teacher? How quaint. And your family? What do they do?" I explained about my parents' occupations, watching as Victoria's expression grew more and more disapproving. By the time I finished, the atmosphere in the room was tense. Victoria smiled tightly. "Well, Melissa," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I must say, you're not quite what I had in mind for Jack. You're simply not the kind of girl I envisioned as a daughter-in-law." I felt as if I'd been slapped. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Richard cleared his throat. "Victoria, that's enough. Jack is old enough to make his own decisions about who he wants to marry." Victoria pursed her lips, but said nothing more. The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable small talk until Jack and I made our excuses to leave. As we drove home in silence, I finally let the tears fall. "They hate me, don't they?" I choked out. Jack reached over and took my hand. "They don't hate you, Mel. My mother, she's just very particular. That's why I put off this meeting for so long. I'm sorry you had to go through that." In the months following our engagement, Jack and I threw ourselves into wedding planning. We wanted a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and family. However, Victoria had other ideas. One afternoon, as Jack and I were discussing potential venues, my phone rang. It was Victoria. "Melissa, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I've been thinking about your wedding. I've taken the liberty of contacting some of the finest venues in the city. Oh, and I have a list of at least 100 guests we simply must invite." I felt my stomach drop. That's very kind of you, Victoria, but Jack and I were hoping for something smaller. Nonsense, she interrupted. My son is getting married. It has to be a grand affair. I want all my friends to see how happy he is. The next day, we met with Victoria to discuss the wedding plans. Jack was firm, explaining that we wanted a small ceremony and couldn't afford an extravagant affair. Victoria's face turned cold. I see. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps I should withdraw my offer to help. After all, it seems you two have it all figured out. Despite the tension, we stood our ground. In the end, we planned the wedding we wanted, a simple ceremony in a local park, followed by a reception at a charming restaurant. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. The ceremony was beautiful. Jack's eyes filled with tears as I walked down the aisle, and when we said our vows, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. During the toasts, Victoria stood up, glass in hand. My stomach clenched, dreading what she might say. Well, she began, her voice carrying across the room. This certainly isn't the wedding I envisioned for my son. But I suppose we must make do with what we have. A shocked murmur ran through the guests. Victoria continued, her words becoming increasingly critical of the simple decorations, the food, and even my dress. With each word, I felt smaller and more humiliated. Finally, she turned her gaze directly to me. I must say, I'm not entirely comfortable in this company. I think it's best if I take my leave early. With that, she set down her glass and swept out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Our friends and family rallied around us, offering words of support and trying to lift the mood. Gradually, the party resumed, and by the end of the night, Victoria's dramatic exit was almost forgotten in the joy of celebration. After our honeymoon, Jack and I settled into married life in his apartment. However, my happiness was short-lived as Victoria began to make her presence felt in increasingly intrusive ways. One afternoon, I came home early from school to find Victoria in our living room, rearranging our furniture. I was shocked to see her there, especially since we hadn't given her a key. When Jack got home, I told him what had happened. He looked uncomfortable, but promised to talk to his mother about boundaries. However, Victoria's unexpected visits continued. She'd show up unannounced, always with some excuse about helping or checking on us. One day, as I was leaving for work, I overheard Victoria talking to our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, in the hallway. I stopped short when I heard my name. You know, you really should keep an eye on Melissa, Victoria was saying in a low voice. She comes from a less desirable area. One can never be too careful with their jewelry. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in how some of our neighbors treated me. Friendly smiles were replaced with wary glances, and casual conversations in the elevator became awkward silences. It was clear that Victoria's words had had an effect. That evening, I broke down in tears as I told Jack what I'd overheard. He was angry and immediately confronted his mother, demanding she return the spare key she'd somehow obtained. Victoria's response was to play the victim, accusing me of turning her son against her. She began posting thinly veiled criticisms of me on social media, never mentioning me by name but making it clear who she was talking about. Then, one day, I was called into the principal's office at school. Mr. Thompson, my boss, looked uncomfortable as he slid an envelope across his desk to me. "Melissa, we received this, complained about you," he said, his voice kind but concerned. Normally, we don't put much stock in anonymous letters, but given the nature of the accusations, I felt I should bring it to your attention. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and read the letter. It was a litany of false accusations, everything from theft to inappropriate behavior with students. My mind reeled. There was only one person who could be behind this, Victoria. Mr. Thompson assured me he didn't believe the accusations, but warned me that rumors had started circulating among some of the staff. As I left his office, I could feel the stares of my colleagues, hear the whispers behind my back. As the months passed, what should have been joyous family gatherings turned into nightmarish ordeals. Every holiday, every family dinner became an opportunity for Victoria to belittle and humiliate me in front of Jack's friends and relatives. The breaking point came at a party Victoria hosted at her home. I'd worn a simple white skirt, feeling pretty and confident for once. As the evening wore on, I noticed people giving me odd looks and snickering behind their hands. It wasn't until Jack arrived late and pulled me aside that I learned the horrifying truth. "Mel," he said, his face a mix of anger and embarrassment, "there's a huge red stain on the back of your skirt. It looks like ketchup." My cheeks burned with humiliation as I realized I'd been walking around all evening with this stain, completely unaware. But worse was to come. Victoria, it seemed, had been busy taking photos of me throughout the night, always angled to prominently display the stain. By the time we got home, these photos were all over social media, accompanied by Victoria's mocking comments. The next day at school was a nightmare. Some of my students had seen the photos, and I could hear their whispered jokes and giggles. It took all my strength not to break down in tears in front of my class. That evening, I told Jack I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm done with these family gatherings," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't keep subjecting myself to your mother's cruelty." To my relief, Jack agreed. "You're right, Mel. We'll stop attending. My mother's behavior is unacceptable." Amidst this turmoil, I discovered I was pregnant. For a brief, shining moment, I hoped this news might soften Victoria's heart. Perhaps the prospect of a grandchild would bring peace to our fractured family. I couldn't have been more wrong. Victoria's reaction to the news was chilling. "Are you sure it's Jack's?" she asked, her voice dripping with insinuation. "After all, you two haven't been around much lately. Who knows what you've been up to?" I was stunned by her accusation, but I soon realized it was more than just cruel words. I began to notice a car following me on my way to and from work. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the same nondescript sedan kept appearing wherever I went. Shaken, I called the police. To my shock, when they tracked down and questioned the man, he admitted he was a private detective hired by Victoria to follow me. She had convinced herself that I was cheating on Jack and that the baby wasn't his. When Jack found out, he was livid. He confronted his mother in a heated phone call that I could hear from across the room. Victoria, caught red-handed, had no choice but to call off the detective. Months passed, and soon it was time for our baby to arrive. The delivery was long and difficult, but when I finally held our son in my arms, all the pain melted away. However, as I looked at him, I noticed something unexpected. Our beautiful baby boy had a much darker complexion than either Jack or me. He looked almost biracial. A seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. Would Jack think I'd been unfaithful? Before he could voice any suspicions, I insisted on a DNA test. The wait for the results was agonizing, but finally, we got the news: Jack was indeed our son's biological father. The doctor, seeing our confusion, suggested another possibility. "It's possible this trait comes from one of your parents. We could do DNA tests on them as well, to trace the genetic line." My parents, when approached with the idea, were calm and agreeable. They understood our confusion and were happy to help solve the mystery. But the thought of telling Victoria made my blood run cold. Given her past accusations and behavior, I feared how she might react to this news. Would she use this as ammunition in her ongoing campaign against me? As I cradled our beautiful, mysterious baby boy, I looked at Jack. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack took my hand, his eyes full of love and determination. "We're going to love our son, no matter what. And we'll get to the bottom of this. Together." The day Victoria first saw her grandson should have been a joyous occasion. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. As soon as she laid eyes on our beautiful baby boy, her face contorted with shock and disgust. "What is this?" she shrieked, recoiling from the crib. "This child is too dark. He can't be Jack's." Before I could even respond, she rounded on me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You whore! You cheated on my son with some black guy from the alley, didn't you? "Victoria, please," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. "We've done a DNA test. Jack is the father. I've never been unfaithful." But she was beyond reason. She stormed out of our apartment, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few hours later, when I returned from a quick errand, I found all of my belongings strewn across the hallway outside our apartment. Clothes, books, even my underwear, all scattered on the floor for anyone to see. I stood there, shocked and humiliated, as neighbors peeked out of their doors to see what the commotion was about. Jack was livid when he came home and saw what his mother had done. He immediately called her, putting her on speakerphone so I could hear. "Mom, this has to stop," he shouted. "We've done a DNA test. I am the father. Melissa has never cheated on me." Victoria's voice was cold and dismissive. "DNA tests can be faked. I know what I see. We even had my parents take DNA tests, which confirmed their relationship to our son." But Victoria refused to listen to reason. When we suggested she and Jack's father take tests as well, she categorically refused. Victoria's obsession only grew worse over time. She began calling me from unknown numbers, leaving threatening voicemails. "Admit you cheated, or I'll destroy both your careers," she hissed in one particularly chilling message. She sent compromising letters to both Jack's workplace and my school. The stress became so overwhelming that I had to quit my job and find a position at another school across town. But even that wasn't enough. Victoria's campaign of harassment escalated. She planted threatening letters in our mailbox. She even went so far as to hire actors to harass me in public, taking photos of these staged encounters and sending them to Jack as proof of my infidelity. One night, as we lay in bed, both too stressed to sleep, I turned to Jack. "I'm worried about your mother," I whispered. "This behavior, it's not normal. I think she might need help." Jack nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. But she'd never agree to see someone." The next day, I decided to reach out to Jack's father, Richard. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. Over coffee, I poured out everything that had been happening, the harassment, the threats, the elaborate schemes Victoria had concocted. Richard listened, his face growing more and more concerned. When I finished, he sat back with a heavy sigh. "I've noticed changes in her behavior," he admitted. "But I had no idea it had gotten this bad. You're right, she needs help. But she'd never agree to see a psychiatrist willingly." We spent the next hour brainstorming how we could get Victoria the help she clearly needed without her knowing. Richard's plan was simple, but effective. Under the guise of changing insurance providers, he convinced Victoria to undergo a comprehensive health checkup at a new clinic. To our surprise, she agreed without much fuss. The day of the examination arrived, and we all waited anxiously for the results. When they came, they were more shocking than any of us could have imagined. Victoria was diagnosed with a complex mental illness, one that was genetically transmitted through the female line in her family. The doctor explained that without early intervention, the women in her family tended to experience severe mental health deterioration as they aged. Victoria's erratic behavior and obsessive actions were symptoms of this progressive condition. The news hit us all hard, but it also brought a sense of relief. There was a reason for Victoria's actions, a medical explanation for the torment she had put us through. With the diagnosis came a treatment plan, and Victoria was admitted to a specialized clinic for care. But the revelations didn't stop there. Richard, in an attempt to understand the genetic components of Victoria's condition, decided to undergo genetic testing himself. The results shook our family to its core. Richard was not Jack's biological father. When Richard shared this news with us, the pieces suddenly fell into place. It wasn't me who had been unfaithful, it was Victoria, years ago, with a man of African descent. The very thing she had accused me of, she had done herself. I expected anger or resentment from Richard, but his reaction surprised me. He looked at Jack with tears in his eyes and said, "Son, I may not be your biological father, but I raised you. I loved you from the moment you were born, and nothing will ever change that. You are my son in every way that matters." Jack hugged his father tightly, affirming that Richard was and always would be his dad. As for his biological father, Jack decided he had no interest in searching for him. "The man who raised me, who stood by me through everything, that's my real father," he declared. With Victoria receiving the care she needed and the truth finally out in the open, a sense of peace settled over our family. Richard, free from Victoria's influence, became a doting grandfather to our son. He would spend hours playing with him, marveling at his curly black hair and striking blue eyes. One evening, as we sat in the living room of Richard's spacious house, he made an unexpected proposal. "Why don't you all move in here?" he suggested. "This place is too big for just me, and I'd love to have my family close." Jack and I exchanged glances, then smiled. It felt right, like the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. We agreed, and within a few weeks, we had moved into Richard's home. Life settled into a new, happier rhythm. Our son grew into a handsome, swarthy boy, his mixed heritage evident in his features. But to us, and to everyone who knew our family's story, his appearance was simply a part of who he was, a beautiful, loved child. Victoria remained in the clinic, receiving the care she needed. While we didn't visit often, we made sure she was comfortable and well treated. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was one we could live with. My name is Audrey, and I was born into what you might call a typical middle-class family. My father was an entrepreneur, always busy with his business, while my mother ruled our home with an iron fist. I had an older sister who seemed to be the perfect daughter in my mother's eyes. From a young age, I learned that in our house, what Mom said was law. Whatever Lisa did, I had to do too. Whatever Mom decided, that was final. Dad would sometimes try to intervene, but he was rarely home, and when he was, Mom always found a way to get her way. As I grew older, the control only tightened. Every decision, from what clothes I wore to what friends I could have, seemed to be made for me. Lisa, meanwhile, flourished under Mom's guidance. She was the golden child, always doing exactly what was expected of her. When Lisa was in her final year of high school, she started dating Richard, the son of a local business tycoon. Mom was over the moon. "Did you see how he looked at her?" Mom gushed after their first dinner together. "Mark my words, we'll be planning a wedding before you know it." I rolled my eyes, but kept quiet. I was in my sophomore year, and I'd learned by now that disagreeing with Mom only led to arguments I couldn't win. Sure enough, Lisa and Richard's relationship progressed quickly. By the time I was a senior, they were engaged, and Mom couldn't have been happier. "Now, Audrey," she said one evening, her eyes gleaming with a look I'd come to dread, "we need to start thinking about your future too. Lisa's done so well for herself, and you're such a pretty girl. I'm sure we can find you a nice young man from a good family." I felt my stomach twist. "Mom, I'm not even out of high school yet. Can't I focus on college first?" She waved her hand dismissively. "College is important, of course, but so is securing your future. You know, Richard has a cousin who's just a few years older than you. He helps run the family business. I think you two would hit it off splendidly." And just like that, my fate was being decided for me. Again. I looked to Dad for help, but he just gave me a weak smile and retreated to his study. I was on my own, as usual. Just as Mom had orchestrated, I found myself on a date with Richard's cousin, James. He was handsome, I'll give him that, but from the moment we met, something felt off. "So, Audrey," James said, leaning back in his chair at the upscale restaurant he'd chosen, "I hear you're headed to college soon. Any thoughts on what you'll study?" I opened my mouth to answer, but he cut me off. "Business, right? It's the smart choice. You'll need to understand how things work when you're part of our family." I blinked, taken aback. "Actually, I was thinking about." "Trust me," he interrupted again. "Business is the way to go. I'll talk to the admissions office at my alma mater. They owe me a favor." And that's how it went. James talked, I listened, and any attempt I made to voice my own opinions was swiftly overridden. By the end of the night, I felt suffocated. Despite my reservations, Mom and Lisa were ecstatic. "He's perfect for you," Lisa squealed when I got home. "Did you see his watch? That alone probably cost more than Dad makes in a month." I forced a smile, not wanting to burst their bubble. But as the weeks went by and James and I continued to date, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. He was always telling me what to do, what to wear, how to act. It was like having another mother, only worse. One evening, after a particularly stifling date where James had planned our next 3 outings without even asking me, I'd had enough. I called him the next day. "James, I think we need to talk," I said, my heart pounding. "Sure, babe. What's up?" His cavalier tone grated on my nerves. I took a deep breath. "I don't think this is working out. You're a great guy, but..." "Whoa, hold on," he cut in. "Is this because I ordered for you last night? I told you, I know what's best. You'll learn to appreciate it." "No, James. It's not just that. I don't think we're compatible. I want to break up." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. "You're making a mistake, Audrey. You won't find better than me. Think about your family, about your future. Don't be stupid." I hung up, my hands shaking. I'd done it. I'd broken free. But my relief was short-lived. The moment Mom found out, all hell broke loose. "What were you thinking?" she screeched. "James is perfect for you. Do you want to end up alone? Do you want to shame this family like that?" I stood my ground, but the pressure was immense. Day after day, Mom and Lisa tag-teamed me, wearing down my resolve. They'd arrange accidental meetings with James, leaving us alone together when he'd stop by to see Mom. The constant barrage was exhausting. Each day, I felt my resolve weakening. Finally, worn down by the relentless pressure, I gave up. "Fine," I told Mom, my voice hollow. "I'll give James another chance." The look of triumph on her face made my stomach turn, but I was too tired to fight anymore. I began to accept James's courtship again, going through the motions of the relationship they all wanted from me. Mom and Lisa were overjoyed. In the evenings, I'd overhear them excitedly planning for the future, discussing how they would manage the brothers' company once James and I were married. They dreamed aloud about all the money and the entire business that would become available to them. As if controlling my love life wasn't enough, Lisa took it upon herself to plan my entire career. One evening, she burst into my room, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Audrey, I've got it all figured out," she exclaimed. "There's a perfect position for you in Richard and James' company. You'll be the head of PR. That's why you're going to Hillside Business College. I've already picked out your classes." My protests fell on deaf ears. Before I knew it, I was enrolled in Hillside, studying subjects I had zero interest in. Each day was a struggle, and I felt my spirit dying a little more with every class. After a particularly grueling week, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Dad, telling him everything. To my surprise and relief, he listened. "Audrey," he said finally, "this is your life. If you're not happy, then it's time for a change. I'll support you, whatever you decide." With Dad's blessing and financial support, I made my escape. I applied to a college in another city, one that offered programs I was genuinely interested in. When I got accepted, I packed my bags and left without looking back. Once I was settled in my new city, I knew there was one more thing I had to do. With trembling hands, I wrote a message to James. "James, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I don't love you, and I don't want to see you again. Please respect my decision." I hit send, hoping he'd understand. His reply came quickly, and my heart sank as I read it. "Audrey, you're not thinking straight. I'm going to talk to your mother and Lisa. They'll knock some sense into you. You're not going anywhere, babe. We're meant to be together." I felt sick. Even miles away, they were trying to control me. Months passed, and I thrived in my new environment. I made friends, excelled in my classes, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Then, at a graduation party for a friend, I met him. Tom, the brother of one of the graduates. He was kind, funny, and most importantly, he listened when I spoke. We started dating, and I fell hard. This wasn't the manufactured affection I'd felt for James. This was real, all-consuming love. When Tom proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. With shaking hands, I dialed my parents' number. "Mom, Dad," I said when they picked up, "I'm coming home for a visit. And, I'm bringing my fiancé." The silence on the other end was deafening. When we arrived at my parents' house, Dad greeted us warmly, genuine happiness shining in his eyes. Mom and Lisa, however, were cold and aloof. At dinner, the interrogation began. "So, Tom," Mom said, her voice sickly sweet, "what position do you hold in your company?" Tom looked confused. "Oh, I'm just starting out. Entry-level marketing associate." I saw the disappointment flash in Mom's eyes. Lisa jumped in. "And what about your family's business?" "We don't have a family business," Tom replied honestly. "My parents are teachers." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's smile became forced. "Audrey, dear, can I speak to you in the kitchen?" In the kitchen, Mom's facade cracked. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "You had James. A successful, wealthy man who could provide for you. And you choose this?" Before I could respond, the front door opened. To my horror, James walked in, as if he owned the place. He strode over to me, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "Hey babe, miss me?" Tom stood up, his face flushed with anger. He ordered James to get away from me. Mom turned to him, her voice ice cold. "You arrogant, ill-mannered boy. How dare you come into our home and try to steal our daughter? Get out, now." I'd had enough. I shrugged off James' arm and took Tom's hand. "We're leaving," I announced, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. As we walked out, I could hear Mom, Lisa, and James shouting after us. But for once, I didn't care. I was choosing my own path, with someone who truly loved me for who I was. Despite the drama with my family, Tom and I went ahead with our wedding plans. The day finally arrived, and it was beautiful, almost perfect. The only shadow on our happiness was the conspicuous absence of my mother and sister. During the reception, I couldn't escape the concerned looks and whispered questions from relatives. I could see the confusion and concern on the faces of Tom's family. How could I explain that my own mother and sister had chosen not to come because they disapproved of the man I loved? After the wedding, Tom and I settled into his apartment, ready to start our new life together. For the most part, things were wonderful. We were happy, in love, and excited about our future. But there was one recurring nightmare: family holidays at my parents' house. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding, we decided to attend, hoping for reconciliation. Big mistake. As we walked in, I froze. There, sitting at the dining table like he belonged, was James. "Audrey," Mom exclaimed, her voice sickly sweet. "Look who decided to join us. Isn't it nice of James to come?" I saw Tom's jaw clench, but he remained silent. As we were cleaning up, James cornered me in the kitchen. "Hey, Audrey," he said, leaning in close. "Can we talk privately, for old time's sake?" Before I could respond, Tom appeared, his face thunderous. He grabbed James by the shirt, pushing him back. "Stay away from my wife," he growled. Mom burst in, her face red with anger. "How dare you," she shrieked at Tom. "Get out of my house, you brute." We left, and I thought that would be the end of it. But every holiday, every family gathering, the same scene played out. James would be there, Mom would fawn over him, and Tom and I would leave feeling hurt and angry. The final straw came when I saw the social media posts. Mom and Lisa had shared childhood photos of me, pictures of James and me together, all with captions about how I had abandoned the family, how Tom was tearing the family apart. That night, I sat down at my computer and began to type. I poured out everything, the years of manipulation, the pressure to be with James, the constant undermining of my choices. I described how they had tried to control every aspect of my life, from my career to my love life. I explained why Tom and I had stopped coming to family events, detailing the uncomfortable situations we'd been put in. The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in from relatives and friends, many expressing shock at what I'd been through and offering support. The tide of family opinion had turned. Where once there had been judgment, now there was understanding. Where there had been sympathy for Mom and Lisa, now there was criticism of their controlling behavior. After my big post online, I stopped talking to my mom and sister. I did talk to my dad, though, and he was really supportive. This made my mom really angry. She yelled at Dad, trying to get him to make me divorce Tom and marry James instead. Dad had always done what Mom wanted, but this time was different. He'd had enough. He shouted back at her and even gave her divorce papers. They split up, and Dad let Mom keep the house so he wouldn't have to pay her money every month. He moved out with just one suitcase. He had some savings, so he rented a place near me and Tom. Mom and Lisa, predictably, didn't take this well. Their social media accounts exploded with posts accusing me of turning Dad against Mom, of destroying our family. The psychological pressure was relentless. Unable to bear it any longer, I blocked their accounts and made my own profiles private. As I clicked the confirm button, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. At first, I thought it was just stress, but as the feeling persisted, a different possibility crossed my mind. A quick trip to the pharmacy and an anxious wait later, my suspicion was confirmed: I was pregnant. Joy and fear warred within me. Would this news finally make Mom and Lisa back off? My hope was short-lived. Somehow, Mom found out about my pregnancy, probably through one of the relatives I hadn't blocked. But instead of reaching out with congratulations or reconciliation, she started a vicious rumor campaign. "Did you hear?" my cousin texted me. "Your mom is telling everyone the baby is James's. She says you've been sneaking around behind Tom's back." I stared at the message in disbelief, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. How could she stoop so low? The stress was becoming unbearable. Tom found me crying on the couch that evening. Without a word, he wrapped me in his arms, letting me sob into his shirt. When I finally calmed down, he gently lifted my chin, his eyes full of love and concern. "This has to stop," he said softly. "You need a break from all this drama. How about a vacation? Just you, somewhere peaceful, to relax and focus on yourself and our baby." The idea was tempting, but I hesitated. "I can't just leave you to deal with all this." He smiled, shaking his head. "I'll be fine. You and the little one are my priority. Let me take care of you." Before I knew it, Tom had booked me a week-long stay at a serene country resort. As I packed my bags, I felt a glimmer of hope. A week away from all the chaos, a chance to breathe and center myself, it sounded like heaven. For the first few days of my vacation, I finally found the peace I'd been craving. The country resort was beautiful, with its lush forests and serene lakes. I spent my time reading, taking gentle walks, and just breathing in the fresh air. It felt like I could finally relax. But on the third day, my tranquility was shattered. As I walked into the resort's dining area, I froze. There, at a nearby table, were Lisa, her husband Richard, and James. My heart sank. This couldn't be a coincidence. Lisa spotted me and waved enthusiastically, as if we were the best of friends. "Audrey, what a surprise. Come join us." I shook my head. "Please, just leave me alone. I'm here to rest." But Lisa wouldn't take no for an answer. For the next 2 days, she kept showing up wherever I went. She'd sit at my table with Richard and James, chatting and laughing as if everything was normal. She was constantly taking selfies of the four of us, posting them online with captions like "family reunion" and "so great to reconnect." I felt sick. I knew what she was doing, trying to create a false narrative, to make it look like I was happily spending time with James. She wanted to cause problems between me and Tom. I texted my husband about what's going on here. By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to cut my trip short and go home. As I was leaving my room with my suitcase, Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs. "Audrey, wait," she called out. "You can't leave. James is ready to forgive you. He says he'll even adopt your baby. He still wants to marry you." I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my pregnancy. "I'm not feeling well, Lisa. Please, just leave me alone." I turned to go down the stairs, but Lisa grabbed my arm. "You're such a fool," she hissed. "Can't you see what's best for you?" "Let go of me," I shouted, trying to pull away. She released my arm, but the sudden movement threw me off balance. I felt myself falling, tumbling down the stairs. The world spun around me, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was at the bottom of the stairs. Tom was leaning over me, his face pale with worry. How had he gotten here? The pain in my abdomen was excruciating. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and doctors' concerned faces. Despite their best efforts, it was too late. I had lost the baby. As I lay in the hospital bed, Tom holding my hand, the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. The vacation that was supposed to be my escape had turned into a nightmare. My sister's relentless pursuit of her own agenda had cost me my child. In the aftermath of the tragedy, my grief turned to rage. The loss of my child was not just a terrible accident, it was the result of Lisa's reckless and manipulative behavior. With Tom's support, I decided to take legal action against my sister. The court case was grueling, but justice was on my side. Several resort guests had witnessed Lisa's confrontation with me on the stairs. Their testimonies, along with security camera footage, provided irrefutable evidence of her dangerous actions. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me $10,000 in compensation. When news of the lawsuit reached my mother, her reaction was swift and harsh. She called me, her voice cold and cutting. "You've gone too far this time, Audrey," she spat. "Suing your own sister? You're no longer my daughter." The line went dead, and with it, the last thread connecting me to my mother snapped. Despite the finality of it, I felt a strange sense of relief. Tom and I decided it was time for a fresh start. We sold our apartment and bought a new house with a mortgage. We were careful to keep our new address a secret from my mother and sister. Only Dad knew where we lived now, and he promised to keep it to himself. The move was just the beginning of our healing process. I started seeing a psychologist, working through the trauma of losing our child and the years of family manipulation. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. As months passed, our life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Then, one morning, I discovered I was pregnant again. Joy mingled with fear as I shared the news with Tom. "We'll keep it between us for now," he said, holding me close. "No one else needs to know until you're ready." We guarded our secret carefully, telling no one, not even my dad. I was extra cautious, following every bit of advice from my doctor. As my belly grew, we finally shared the news with Dad, swearing him to secrecy. The pregnancy progressed without complications, each week bringing a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Finally, after what felt like the longest 9 months of my life, our daughter was born, a healthy, beautiful baby girl. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Our daughter, Lily, was now 6 months old, filling our days with joy and laughter. Tom and I had found our groove as parents, and with each passing day, the pain of our past faded a little more. One afternoon, as I was putting Lily down for her nap, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Audrey, it's your mother." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice uncharacteristically meek. "Your sister is here too. We need your help." As they explained their situation, I felt a mix of emotions: pity, anger, and a strange sense of vindication. Lisa's husband had gone bankrupt, and she had left him. They were in dire financial straits. "We need you to talk to your father," Mom said. "Convince him to help us out. And, we need you to return the compensation money from the lawsuit." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Dad makes his own decisions, and that money was awarded by the court. Please don't contact me again." Just then, Lily started crying in the next room. Mom's voice sharpened. "Is that a baby? Audrey, do you have a child?" I closed my eyes, cursing the timing. "Yes, I have a daughter." "A granddaughter?" Mom's voice rose. "How dare you keep this from me? I demand to see her." "You can't keep my grandchild from me." Her shouting woke Lily fully, and her cries grew louder. I felt my own anger rising. "You lost any right to be in my child's life when you disowned me," I said, my voice cold. "If you or Lisa try to contact us again, I'll file for a restraining order. Goodbye." I hung up and immediately blocked the number, my hands shaking. Tom came in, carrying a fussing Lily. "Who was that?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "My mother and sister," I said, taking Lily into my arms. "They're having money troubles and wanted help." I said no. Tom nodded, pulling us both into a hug. "You did the right thing," he said softly. Later that week, I called Dad to warn him about Mom and Lisa's situation. He sighed heavily. "I know, sweetheart. They tried to contact me too," he said. "I've heard through the grapevine that they've been evicted from their home. They're living in a pretty rough area now." I felt a twinge of sadness, quickly replaced by resolve. "They made their choices, Dad. We can't let them drag us back into their drama." "You're right," he agreed. "How's my little princess doing?" As I updated him on Lily's latest milestones, I felt a wave of gratitude. Despite everything, I had this: a loving husband, a beautiful daughter, and a father who stood by me. We had built a life filled with love and respect, far from the manipulation and drama of my past. At 34, I'm Monica, a successful journalist at a top fashion magazine and a well-known fashion blogger. As I sit in my office, surrounded by racks of designer clothes and stacks of glossy magazines, I can't help but feel a sense of pride. I've worked hard to get here, and every late night and early morning has been worth it. My phone buzzes with a notification. It's an email from my editor. "Monica, great job on the latest piece. The readers are loving it. Keep it up." I smile to myself. This is what I live for: the rush of creating content that resonates with people, the thrill of being at the forefront of fashion trends. But it wasn't always like this. My mind drifts back to my childhood, to the house where I grew up. It was a nice house in the suburbs, but for me, it was more of a battlefield than a home. My sister, Sarah, is 7 years older than me. From the day I was born, she saw me as competition. I remember her constant need for attention, her jealousy, her manipulations. It's funny how some wounds never truly heal, even after all these years. There was this one time, when I was about 8. Sarah was 15 and had invited her friends over. I was in my room, reading a fashion magazine. Suddenly, I heard a crash from downstairs. My heart sank. I knew, somehow, that this wouldn't end well for me. I crept down the stairs to find my mother's favorite vase in pieces on the floor. Sarah and her friends were standing around it, looking guilty. But then Sarah's eyes locked with mine, and I saw a familiar glint in them. "Monica," she shrieked. "What have you done?" I stood there, mouth agape, as Sarah spun a tale of how I had been running wild through the house and knocked over the vase. Her friends, not wanting to get in trouble, nodded along. But I didn't, I started to say, but my parents had already made up their minds. "Monica, how could you be so careless?" my mother scolded. "You know how much I loved that vase." "You're grounded for a month," my father added. "And no pocket money until you've paid for a new vase." That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. One day, I'd have my own place, my own life, far away from Sarah's shadow. And here I am now, living that promise. I've got my own house, bought with a mortgage I'm proud to pay off each month. It's my sanctuary, my piece of peace and quiet. As I wrap up my latest article on fall fashion trends, my mind wanders back to the day Sarah got married. I was 15, and I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. Finally, I thought, I'd have some peace in my life. The wedding itself was a lavish affair. Sarah looked stunning in her white gown, but I couldn't help noticing the smug look she threw my way during the ceremony. A year after the wedding, Sarah had a daughter, my niece, Lily. As she grew, I found myself spending more and more time with her. Sarah seemed all too happy to pawn her off on me, preferring to spend her time gossiping with friends or scrolling endlessly on her phone. "Monica, can you take Lily this weekend?" Sarah's voice crackled through the phone. It was a familiar request. "I've got plans." I sighed, knowing full well that plans probably meant another meeting with chatty friends. "Sure, Sarah. I'd love to spend time with Lily." That weekend, I took Lily to a new children's entertainment complex that had just opened up in town. Her eyes lit up as we entered, taking in the colorful play areas and exciting activities. "Aunt Monica, look," Lily squealed, pointing at a giant slide. "Can we go on that?" I laughed, her excitement infectious. "Of course we can, sweetie. We can do whatever you want today." As I dropped Lily off at home that evening, I overheard Sarah arguing with her husband, Mason. Their voices were muffled, but I caught snippets about Sarah's frequent absences and her disinterest in family life. I quickly ushered Lily inside, not wanting her to hear the argument. But as I turned to leave, Mason caught my arm. "Monica," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know what to do anymore. Sarah's never home, and when she is, she's glued to her phone. It's like Lily and I don't even exist to her." "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. "If there's anything I can do to help with Lily, just let me know." He nodded gratefully, and I left, feeling a mix of emotions. Anger at Sarah for neglecting her family, worry for Lily, and a strange sense of vindication. All those years of Sarah tormenting me, and now her true colors were showing to everyone else too. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I was at a cafe with my friends when my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice tense and brittle. "Monica, you need to come home. Now." I arrived at my parents' house to find chaos. Sarah was sobbing on the couch, mascara streaking down her face. My father was pacing, red-faced with anger. And in the corner, looking shell-shocked, was Sarah's husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, as I would learn. "He caught me," Sarah wailed between sobs. With her lover," Mason spat out. "In our own bed." I stood there, stunned. Despite knowing about Sarah's indiscretions, seeing the fallout was something else entirely. And then, as always, Sarah's eyes locked onto me. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger. "If you hadn't been so perfect, if you hadn't taken up so much of Mom and Dad's attention, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere for love." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, faced with the consequences of her own actions, Sarah was trying to blame me. "That's enough, Sarah," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choices. Don't you dare try to pin this on me." My parents, predictably, rushed to Sarah's defense. "Monica, how can you be so heartless?" my mother cried. "Your sister is hurting." I looked at them, these people who had always taken Sarah's side, who had never believed me when I told them about her cruelty. In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done with the drama, the accusations, the constant favoritism. I'm moving out." My parents protested, but their words fell on deaf ears. I was 22, fresh out of college, and ready to start my own life. Within a week, I had found a small apartment across town and moved out of my childhood home. The next few years were a whirlwind. I landed an entry-level job at a fashion magazine, throwing myself into work with a passion born of determination to succeed on my own terms. Nights were spent poring over fashion blogs, learning everything I could about the industry. All the while, I kept my distance from my family. Sarah and Lily had moved back in with our parents, but I tried to go there as little as possible. Still, I made an effort to stay in touch with Lily. We'd meet for ice cream or trips to the park, away from the watchful eyes of Sarah and my parents. Lily was growing into a sweet, thoughtful girl, so different from her mother that it sometimes took my breath away. As the years rolled by, my career took off like a rocket. At 34, I found myself in a position I'd only dreamed of as a fresh-faced college graduate. Senior journalist at a top fashion magazine, my byline recognized by industry insiders and fashion enthusiasts alike. But that wasn't all. I'd also cultivated a significant following as a fashion blogger, my social media filled with outfit ideas, trend forecasts, and behind-the-scenes peeks at the glamorous world of high fashion. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another 1,000 followers on Instagram. I smiled to myself, remembering the days when I'd celebrate each new follower like a personal victory. As I flipped through the glossy photos, my mind wandered to my own wardrobe. I'd come a long way from the hand-me-downs and bargain bin finds of my youth. Now, my closet was filled with designer pieces, each one carefully chosen to reflect my personal style and the image I wanted to project to the world. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Lily, now a teenager. "Aunt Monica, can you help me pick an outfit for my friend's birthday party this weekend?" I smiled, warmth filling my chest. Despite the distance I'd put between myself and Sarah, Lily and I had managed to maintain a close relationship. She'd inherited my love for fashion, and I relished every opportunity to share that passion with her. "Of course, sweetie," I texted back. "Why don't you come over on Saturday morning and we'll put something together?" Sarah. The thought of my sister still brought a twinge of discomfort. We barely spoke these days, our interactions limited to terse exchanges at family gatherings I couldn't avoid. She was still living with our parents, still playing the role of the wronged woman, still using Lily as a pawn in her games. But I refused to let thoughts of Sarah dampen my mood. I had too much to be grateful for, too much to look forward to. My career was thriving, I had a beautiful home that I'd bought with my own hard-earned money, I had Alex, my fiancé, and I was finally, truly happy. As I scrolled through the latest runway looks on my tablet, my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and I sighed, bracing myself for what was to come. "Monica," Sarah's voice was sharp, demanding. "Lily needs a new outfit for her school dance. Something designer, obviously. Just make sure it's expensive and trendy. Lily needs to look better than those other girls." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, a mix of anger and resignation washing over me. How had I become responsible for dressing my niece? Despite my frustration with Sarah, I couldn't help but feel excited about shopping for Lily. At 15, she was developing her own sense of style, and I loved helping her explore that. The next day, Lily and I hit the mall. We spent hours trying on dresses, giggling over some of the more outrageous designs. In the end, we settled on a beautiful emerald green dress that made Lily's eyes sparkle. As we left the store, bags in hand, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment. I loved spoiling Lily, but Sarah's expectation that I would foot the bill for all of Lily's clothing needs was becoming too much. A week later, I found myself at my parents' house for a family dinner. The tension was palpable as soon as I walked in. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Sarah sneered from her spot on the couch, phone in hand as usual. I ignored her, focusing instead on Lily, who ran to give me a hug. "Aunt Monica, I wore the dress to the dance. Everyone loved it." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I smiled, genuinely happy for her. My mother's voice cut through the moment. "Monica, don't you think it's a bit much? Buying such expensive clothes for Lily when your sister is struggling?" I blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" My father chimed in, his tone disapproving. "You're always dressed in designer clothes, driving that fancy car. Don't you think you could help out your family more?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help out? I've been buying all of Lily's clothes for years now. Sarah hasn't spent a dime on her daughter's wardrobe and I don't know how long. Sarah's face twisted into a scowl. "Oh, so now you're going to throw that in my face? Some of us don't have cushy jobs writing about shoes all day." I stood there, stunned into silence. How could they not see the truth? How could they still be taking Sarah's side after all these years? As I drove home that night, tears of frustration stinging my eyes, I realized that some things would never change. No matter how successful I became, no matter how much I did for Lily, in my family's eyes, I would always be the selfish one, the one who needed to do more. However, there was something else in my life, besides a good job and a terrible family. My fiancé. 2 years had flown by since I met Alex. When he proposed on a quiet evening at home, I didn't hesitate to say yes. As a fashion journalist, I knew the importance of the perfect wedding dress. I reached out to a young Italian designer I'd featured in one of my articles. His avant-garde approach to bridal wear had caught my eye, and I knew he could create something truly special. When the dress arrived, my hands shook as I unzipped the garment bag. The moment I saw it, my breath caught in my throat. It was perfect, a delicate peach color that complemented my skin tone, with intricate lace detailing and strategically placed rhinestones that caught the light beautifully. I slipped it on, my heart pounding. As I looked in the mirror, I knew this was it. The dress hugged my curves in all the right places, the color making me look radiant. I felt like a bride, like the successful, confident woman I'd become. Without thinking, I snapped a picture and sent it to Sarah. Despite our differences, she was still my sister, and some small part of me hoped she'd be happy for me. "Got my wedding dress," I texted along with the photo. "What do you think?" Her response was typically Sarah. "Bit much, isn't it? You always did like to show off." I sighed, putting my phone away. I don't know why I expected anything different. Carefully, I hung the dress in my closet, already dreaming of the day I'd walk down the aisle in it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Between finalizing the guest list, choosing a venue, and keeping up with my work, I barely had time to breathe, let alone visit my family. One evening, as I was going over seating arrangements, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Monica, we haven't seen you in weeks," she said, her tone accusatory. "Lily's been asking about you." Guilt washed over me. In all the wedding chaos, I'd neglected my relationship with Lily. "I'm sorry, Mom. Things have been crazy with the wedding planning." About that, my mother's voice took on a familiar disapproving tone. "How much are you spending on this wedding? You know, a modest ceremony would be just as meaningful." I frowned. "Mom, I don't think that's any of your business." "Of course it is," she exclaimed. "We're your family. And speaking of family, have you thought about how you could help your sister instead of spending all this money on one day?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger, "this is my wedding. Alex and I are paying for it ourselves. How we spend our money is our business, not yours, and certainly not Sarah's." "Don't be so selfish, Monica," my mother scolded. "Family should come first." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness wash over me. Even now, with one of the happiest days of my life approaching, my family couldn't simply be happy for me. Everything always had to revolve around Sarah and her needs. Just as the dust was settling from the wedding dress drama, a new storm was brewing. Lily was graduating high school, and with graduation came the inevitable school ball. My phone rang one afternoon while I was in the middle of a photo shoot. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "Monica," Sarah's voice was demanding as ever. "Lily needs a dress for her graduation ball. I want you to buy her one from that new collection by, what's his name? The famous one you're always going on about." I knew exactly which designer she meant, and exactly how much his dresses cost. Sarah, those dresses are incredibly expensive. We're talking thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not spending that kind of money on a dress Lily will wear once. It's not reasonable. Fine, Sarah spat. I'll tell Mom and Dad how greedy you're being. Don't bother calling Lily anymore. She hung up, leaving me standing in the middle of the studio, shaking with anger and frustration. True to her word, my parents called later that day, berating me for my selfishness and lack of family values. After a sleepless night, I came up with a solution. I called Lily, hoping she would answer, despite her mother's threats. Lily, sweetie, I said, relieved to hear her voice. I have an idea about your graduation dress. Why don't you come over and borrow one of mine? I have plenty of designer dresses you could choose from. There was a pause, then Lily's excited voice came through. Really, Aunt Monica? That would be amazing. I could hear Sarah in the background, asking what was going on. After a moment, Sarah came on the line. Fine, she said grudgingly. We'll be over next week. A week later, I was at home, deep in concentration as I finished up an article for the magazine. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Sarah and Lily. The dresses are upstairs in the guest room closet, I said, gesturing towards the stairs. Why don't you two go up and take a look? I just need to finish this article. Sarah nodded curtly and led Lily upstairs. I returned to my computer, immersing myself back in my work. It seemed like only minutes had passed when I heard them coming back down. That was fast, I said, surprised. Did you find something you liked, Lily? But before Lily could answer, Sarah was hurrying her out the door. We need to go, she said abruptly. Thanks for this. A few days after Sarah and Lily's strange visit, I decided to try on my wedding dress again. With all the family drama, I needed a reminder of the joy that was to come. I opened my closet, reached for the garment bag, and it wasn't there. Panic set in as I searched frantically through my entire wardrobe. The beautiful peach dress was nowhere to be found. And then it hit me, Sarah and Lily's hasty departure, their refusal to show me what they'd chosen. They hadn't borrowed a dress, they'd stolen my wedding gown. Furious, I drove to my parents' house. I burst through the door without knocking, making a beeline for Lily's room. There, hanging in her closet, was my peach wedding dress. Lily, I called out, my voice shaking with anger and disappointment. How could you do this? Why would you take my wedding dress? Lily appeared in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide with shame. Before she could speak, Sarah pushed past her, her face twisted with rage. How dare you barge in here and accuse my daughter? Sarah spat. You're so greedy, you can't even lend a dress to your own niece for her graduation? I was stunned. Lend? Sarah, you stole my wedding dress. This isn't just any dress, it's for my wedding day. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Oh, please, you have plenty of dresses. You're just jealous that Lily will look better in it than you ever could. Jealous? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sarah, you're the one who's always been jealous. Of my career, my success. The room fell silent. Then, from behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Monica, how dare you speak to your sister that way? I turned to see both my parents standing there, their faces masks of disappointment and anger. But she stole my wedding dress, I protested. My father shook his head. Always so selfish, Monica. Can't you think of anyone but yourself for once? I stood there, feeling like I was drowning. How had this happened? How was I the villain in this story? Without another word, I grabbed my dress and left. The next day, my phone rang. It was Lily. Aunt Monica, I'm so sorry. Her voice was small, trembling. I didn't know it was your wedding dress. Mom said, she said you'd want me to have it. We didn't even look at the other dresses. I'm so sorry. My anger melted away. Of course, Sarah had manipulated the situation, used Lily as a pawn in her games. "Oh, Lily," I sighed. "It's okay. I understand. How about we go shopping for a new dress?" "Your own dress, not a borrowed one." "Really?" The hope in her voice was palpable. "But I can't afford a nice dress." "Don't worry about that," I said. "But I have a proposal. The dress will be yours, but you'll pay it off in installments. By helping me with my wedding preparations." The day after our phone call, Lily and I hit the stores. It was a day filled with laughter, honest conversations, and a deepening of our bond. We finally settled on a stunning midnight blue gown that made Lily look like a princess. On the night of her graduation, Lily was radiant. As I watched her laughing with her friends, posing for photos, I felt a bittersweet pang. This wonderful young woman had grown up so fast, and I was grateful to be a part of her life. After the ceremony, as we sat in a quiet corner, I took a deep breath. "Lily, there's something I need to tell you." She looked at me, her eyes curious. "I've decided not to invite your mother to my wedding," I said gently. "And I don't think I'll be communicating with her anymore." Lily nodded slowly, surprising me with her calm reaction. "I understand, Aunt Monica. So, does this mean I can't come to the wedding either?" "Oh, no," I exclaimed. "Lily, you're absolutely invited. In fact, I was hoping you'd be one of my bridesmaids." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations, with Lily by my side every step of the way. When my parents found out about my decision to exclude Sarah, they called to inform me that they wouldn't be attending either. To my surprise, I felt more relieved than upset. The day of my wedding arrived, bright and beautiful. As I stood in front of the mirror in my peach dress, Lily helping me with the final touches, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The ceremony was perfect. Alex's face as I walked down the aisle, the love radiating from our friends and chosen family, Mason's surprising presence, my ex-brother-in-law. It all combined to create a day full of joy and new beginnings. As the reception wound down, Lily approached me, excitement written all over her face. "Aunt Monica, I got into college. In New York. Dad's helping me with the tuition." I hugged her tightly, thrilled for her new adventure. "Oh, Lily, that's wonderful. You're going to do great things, I just know it." In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Lily moved to New York for college, calling me regularly for advice on everything from fashion to study habits. "I want to be just like you, Aunt Monica," she'd say, making my heart swell with pride. I threw myself back into my work with renewed passion, my personal life finally free from the drama that had plagued it for so long. Alex was supportive and understanding, a true partner in every sense of the word. My name is Sheila, and I was 30 when I met Tom. We both worked for Global Tech, a large international company where I was a translator. Tom was in the IT department, always ready with a joke or a helping hand when my computer decided to throw a tantrum. It didn't take long for our coffee breaks to turn into dinner dates, and soon enough, we were inseparable. A year later, Tom got down on one knee in the middle of our favorite park. The wedding was a whirlwind of white lace and champagne toasts. Tom's parents, Margaret and Robert, seemed nice enough. Margaret hugged me tightly and whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear." If only I had known then what that welcome truly meant. After the honeymoon, we moved into Tom's apartment. It was spacious and modern, with a view of the city skyline that took my breath away. "This is perfect," I said, twirling around the living room. Tom grinned. "Wait till you see the kitchen." Mom insisted on getting all top-of-the-line appliances when I first moved in. I should have paid more attention to those words. Should have asked more questions. But I was too caught up in the excitement of starting our life together. The first few weeks were bliss. Tom and I fell into an easy rhythm, sharing chores and enjoying quiet evenings together. Then, one Saturday morning, it happened. I was in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes, when I heard the front door open. Thinking Tom had returned from his morning run, I called out, "Hope you're hungry, babe." But it wasn't Tom who walked into the kitchen. It was Margaret. "Oh, hello dear," she said, her eyes scanning the mess I'd made. "I thought I'd pop in and see how you two are settling in." I stood there, spatula in hand, completely stunned. "Margaret, how did you?" She dangled a key in front of me. "I have a spare, of course. How else would I check on my Tommy?" Margaret bustled past me, opening cupboards and peering into the fridge. I watched in disbelief as she pulled out cleaning supplies and started wiping down the already spotless counters. "But, we're married now." "You don't need to." "Nonsense," she interrupted. "Tommy's still my boy. And I have so much free time these days. I'm happy to help." For the next hour, I endured a running commentary on my housekeeping skills, or lack thereof, according to Margaret. By the time Tom returned, I was ready to scream. "Mom?" Tom said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Margaret beamed at him. "Just helping Sheila get things in order, dear. You know how overwhelming it can be for a new wife." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Tom shot me an apologetic look, but didn't say anything to contradict his mother. The next few weeks were a blur of unexpected visits and unsolicited advice. Margaret seemed to materialize in our apartment at the most inconvenient times, always armed with a critique and a story about her own domestic prowess. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, she burst in without warning. "Oh, Sheila," she said, eyeing my neat piles of clothes. "That's not how you fold t-shirts. Here, let me show you." I gritted my teeth. "Margaret, I appreciate your help, but..." "Nonsense," she interrupted, already refolding a stack of Tom's shirts. "I've been doing this for years. Did I ever tell you about my own mother-in-law?" Now she was a piece of work. And so began another session of Margaret's favorite pastime, regaling me with tales of her own suffering at the hands of her mother-in-law. She used to come over unannounced, Margaret said, oblivious to the irony. Always criticizing my cooking, my cleaning. Nothing was ever good enough for her. I bit back the urge to point out the similarities. Instead, I forced a smile. "That must have been difficult." "Oh, it was," Margaret nodded sagely. "But I endured it. And look how well Tommy turned out. You should be grateful I'm nothing like her." Grateful, right? Because having my privacy invaded and my abilities constantly questioned was such a blessing. As the days wore on, my patience wore thin. Margaret's visits became more frequent, her criticism more pointed. She'd run her finger along the top of the fridge, sking at imaginary dust. She'd reorganize the pantry, claiming she knew best how Tommy liked things. Tom, for his part, seemed oblivious to the tension. "Mom's just trying to help," he'd say whenever I brought it up. "She means well." But good intentions or not, I was at my breaking point. The constant intrusion, the endless criticism, the thinly veiled insults, it was all becoming too much. It came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when Margaret waltzed in, key in hand. "Sheila, dear," she called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I thought I'd drop by and give you some pointers on proper meal planning. Tommy's always been particular about his Sunday roasts." I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, feeling something inside me snap. This was my home, my kitchen, my marriage. And I'd had enough. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face her. "Margaret," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "About what, dear?" "About boundaries," I replied. "About privacy. I appreciate your intention to help, but coming over unannounced, criticizing everything I do, it's not helping. It's making me feel uncomfortable in my own home." She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. As the sound echoed through the apartment, I leaned against the counter, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. That evening, as Tom and I sat down for dinner, I knew I had to broach the subject. "Tom," I started, pushing my food around on my plate, "we need to talk about your mother." He sighed, putting down his fork. "What's she done now?" I took a deep breath and recounted the day's events, along with all the other incidents that had been building up. As I spoke, I could see the conflict in Tom's eyes, torn between his love for his mother and his commitment to me. "Sheila, I know Mom can be intense," he said carefully. "But she means well. She's just trying to help." I shook my head. "Tom, I understand that. But this isn't help, it's control. She comes into our home uninvited, criticizes everything I do, and makes me feel like an intruder in my own life. It has to stop." Tom ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "What do you want me to do?" "I need you to set boundaries with her," I said firmly. "Take back her key. Ask her to call before coming over. And most importantly, I need you to stand up for me when she oversteps." There was a long pause as Tom processed my words. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to her." True to his word, Tom had a conversation with Margaret the next day. I wasn't present for it, but from what Tom told me, it didn't go well. Margaret was hurt and offended, claiming we were pushing her out of our lives. But in the end, she reluctantly agreed to our terms. For a while, things seemed to improve. Margaret's visits became less frequent and were always preceded by a phone call. But the peace was short-lived. It started with little things. Suddenly, I found myself uninvited to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. When I asked Tom about it, he'd shrug uncomfortably. "Mom says it's just immediate family this time," he'd say, not meeting my eyes. The final straw came on Tom's father Robert's birthday. Tom and I had planned to go together to wish him well, but at the last minute, Tom got called away on an urgent work matter. "You should still go," Tom insisted. "Dad would want to see you." Hesitantly, I agreed. I rang the doorbell, gift in hand, and waited. When Margaret opened the door, her eyes narrowed. "Sheila," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you. This is a family gathering. And let's be honest, dear. You're not really family, are you?" Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. "You've made it quite clear that you don't want me in your life," she said. "So I think it's best if you leave now. We wouldn't want any uninvited guests ruining Robert's special day." As if on cue, Robert appeared behind her. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between us. Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, Robert," she said, her voice trembling theatrically. "Sheila here was just leaving. Isn't it awful how she's pushed me out of Tommy's life? Taken away my keys, forbidden me from visiting my own son?" I felt my face burning with anger and humiliation. "That's not true," I protested. "I only asked for some boundaries." "Enough," Robert said firmly, surprising us both. He turned to Margaret, his expression stern. "That's enough, Margaret. Sheila is family, and she's welcome here." He then looked at me, his eyes softening. "Please, come in, Sheila. We'd love to have you join us." Shocked and grateful, I stepped inside. Margaret, clearly furious, stormed off to the kitchen. As I followed Robert into the living room, I could feel the eyes of the other guests on me, curious about the scene they'd just witnessed. The next few years were a constant battle with Margaret. Despite our efforts to set boundaries, she always found ways to insert herself into our lives. Then, tragedy struck. Robert fell ill suddenly, his condition deteriorating rapidly. When he passed away, it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. The funeral was a somber affair, with Margaret stoically going through the motions, barely acknowledging my presence. After the service, Robert's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kind-eyed man who had been his close friend, approached us. "Mrs. Walker, if you and your son could join me in private?" Mr. Walker left some specific instructions regarding his will. When they emerged, the atmosphere had changed drastically. Margaret looked pale and shocked, while Tom seemed confused and conflicted. As we drove home, Tom finally broke the silence. "Dad left everything to me," he said quietly. "The house, the savings, everything. Even Mom's house." I was stunned. "What? But why?" Tom shook his head. "I don't know. The lawyer didn't explain." At that moment, I remembered Margaret's reaction. Her face had been a mix of disbelief and anger. I could have sworn I heard her mutter under her breath, "That fool," before composing herself. The next day, Margaret called Tom, her voice trembling. "Tommy, you're not going to kick me out, are you? This house, it's all I have left of your father." Tom's response was immediate. "Of course not, Mom. The house is yours to live in. And I'll set up a monthly allowance for you." I didn't object. It was Tom's inheritance, his money, his decision. And despite our differences, I couldn't imagine leaving Margaret homeless after losing her husband. However, our act of kindness did little to soften Margaret's attitude towards me. She stopped coming to our house, but her influence was still felt. She called Tom constantly, always with some emergency or excuse for why he needed to come over. "Tommy, the sink is leaking. I think I heard a strange noise in the attic. I'm not feeling well. Could you stay the night, just in case?" Tom, ever the dutiful son, would rush to her aid, often staying overnight. It was driving me crazy. As Margaret's birthday approached, I braced myself for another round of exclusion. For the past 2 years, I'd been pointedly uninvited from family gatherings, relegated to the role of outsider in my own marriage. So when Tom announced he had to leave on a last-minute business trip, I resigned myself to a quiet evening alone. I was surprised, then, when my phone rang the day before Margaret's birthday. Even more surprising was the name on the caller ID. "Sheila, dear," Margaret's voice oozed sweetness through the speaker. "I'm calling about my birthday celebration tomorrow. I know we've had our differences, but I'm tired of all this hostility. I'd like us to reconcile." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, utterly dumbfounded. "You want me to come to your birthday party?" "Of course, dear. I know Tommy can't make it, but I'd love to see you there." "What do you say?" Part of me wanted to refuse outright. After years of snubs and barely veiled insults, why should I believe this sudden change of heart? But Margaret's voice sounded so sincere, so genuinely warm, that I found myself wavering. "I suppose I could stop by," I heard myself say. "Wonderful," Margaret exclaimed. "It's at the Willow Creek Country Club. I'll see you at 7. The next evening, I found myself driving to the country club, a carefully chosen gift and a bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat beside me. As I approached the entrance, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I pulled up to the security barrier, where a guard stepped out of his booth. "Name, please?" "Sheila Walker," I replied, trying to sound competent. The guard scanned his list, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see that name here." "There must be some mistake," I said, my unease growing. "Margaret Walker invited me personally. I'm her daughter-in-law." The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, but if you're not on the list, I can't let you in. It's a private event." Flustered, I got out of the car and pulled out my phone and called Margaret. After a few rings, she picked up. "Margaret, it's Sheila. I'm at the entrance, but they won't let me in." A few minutes later, I saw Margaret approaching the barrier, surrounded by a group of well-dressed guests. They were all laughing, glasses in hand, clearly enjoying the party that was already in full swing. As Margaret neared my car, I expected her to clear up the misunderstanding with the guard. Instead, she fixed me with a cold stare that sent chills down my spine. Well, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't the little gold digger herself. Did you really think I'd let trash like you into my birthday celebration?" I stood there, stunned, as Margaret continued her tirade. "I specifically chose this venue to keep out unwanted elements like you. Why are you even here? You're not family." You're nothing but a money-hungry tramp who trapped my son." The guests behind her tittered, clearly enjoying the show. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. "But, you invited me," I stammered. "You said you wanted to reconcile." Margaret's laugh was cold and cruel. "Oh, you poor, naive girl. I wanted to see just how desperate you were to get your hands on our family's money. And look at you, showing up like a stray dog, begging for scraps." For a moment, I stood face to face with Margaret, seeing the malice gleaming in her eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, I dropped the flowers and gift at her feet. Without another word, I got back in my car and drove away, Margaret's mocking laughter and the sounds of the party fading behind me. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from Margaret's cruel words and actions. As soon as I walked through the door, I collapsed onto the couch and called Tom, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Through tears and hiccups, I recounted the entire humiliating ordeal. Tom listened in stunned silence, only interrupting occasionally to ask for clarification. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then, Tom's voice came through, low and angry. "I'm coming home, and then I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my mother." True to his word, Tom was on the next flight home. When he arrived, he held me close, apologizing over and over for his mother's behavior. Then, with a determined look in his eye, he picked up the phone and called Margaret. I could hear Margaret's voice, shrill and defensive, through the speaker. But Tom's responses were calm and resolute. "No, Mom. This time you've gone too far. I don't want to hear your excuses. You humiliated my wife, the woman I love. No, I'm done. I'm cutting you off. No more allowance, no more help. You're on your own." For a week, we enjoyed a peace we hadn't known in years. No frantic calls from Margaret, no emergencies requiring Tom's immediate attention. It felt like we could finally breathe. But of course, it couldn't last. One afternoon, there was a knock at our door. When I opened it, I found Margaret standing there, her eyes red and puffy, her appearance disheveled. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed, pushing past me into the house. "I raised that boy. I devoted my entire life to him. And now, because of you, he's left me with nothing. No money, no support. I can barely afford to eat." She paced the living room, her voice rising hysterically. "It's all your fault. You turned him against me. You're the reason Robert disinherited me. You've ruined everything." I tried to interject, to defend myself, but Margaret was beyond reason. She continued her rant, tears streaming down her face, until she finally collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. After a few minutes, Margaret composed herself and left without another word, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, confused and conflicted. As the door closed behind her, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I knew just who might have them. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Robert's lawyer in his office. The room was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with law books and framed diplomas on the walls. Mr. Thompson looked at me with kind eyes, his hands folded on the desk between us. "Mrs. Walker," he began, "I understand you have some questions about your father-in-law's will?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I do. I need to understand why Robert left everything to Tom and nothing to Margaret. It just doesn't make sense." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a conflicted look crossing his face. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Mrs. Walker, I've known the family for a long time, and what I'm about to tell you, well, it's not pleasant. The truth is, Margaret had been unfaithful to Robert." I felt my jaw drop. "What?" "She had a lover," Mr. Thompson continued. "A man who passed away shortly before Robert's death. This man left Margaret a significant amount of property in his will." I sat there, stunned, as Mr. Thompson went on. "Robert found out about the affair and the inheritance. They had a terrible argument, and that's when he decided to change his will, leaving everything to Tom." My mind was reeling. Margaret, who had always portrayed herself as the devoted wife and mother, had been living a double life. But Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice somber. "Years ago, when Tom was just a boy, Robert's mother, Tom's grandmother, fell ill. She had saved money for years to afford a place in a private nursing home, where she hoped to spend her final days in comfort." I listened, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Margaret convinced Robert to sell his mother's property and send her to a state-run facility instead. They kept the money for themselves and rarely visited the poor woman. She passed away not long after, alone and neglected. I felt sick. The Margaret I knew was manipulative and cruel, but this was a level of callousness I couldn't have imagined. "Robert carried that guilt with him for years," Mr. Thompson said softly. "I think changing his will was his way of trying to make things right, to ensure that Margaret couldn't do to Tom what she had done to his mother." As I left Mr. Thompson's office, my head was spinning. The woman who had accused me of being a gold digger had been the real predator all along, pursuing her own interests at the expense of her family's well-being and happiness. That evening, when Tom came home from work, I sat him down and recounted everything I had learned from Mr. Thompson. Tom listened in stunned silence, his face a mix of disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. "I can't believe it," he said when I finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, she's been lying to us, manipulating us." We stayed up late into the night, talking through the implications of these revelations. Tom was devastated, but also resolute. "This ends now," he said firmly. We didn't have to wait long for Margaret to make her next move. A few days later, she showed up at our door, all tears and pleas for help. "Tommy," she began, her voice quavering. "I know you're angry, but please. I need your help. I have nothing left." Tom's face was like stone as he replied, "That's not true, is it, Mom? We know about your lover, about the apartment and money he left you." Margaret's face drained of color. What are you talking about?" "Drop the act," Tom said, his voice cold. "We know everything. About your affair, about what you did to Grandma. All of it." Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the pitiful, pleading woman. In her place stood someone I recognized all too well, calculating, angry, ready to lash out. "How dare you," she shrieked. "After everything I've done for you. You ungrateful, selfish boy." Tom didn't flinch. "Ungrateful? You're right, I am. Unlike you, I won't be sending you to a state nursing home to die alone." Margaret recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Tom continued, his voice steady, "I'm selling the house. You need to leave. Use the money and property your lover left you, and stop trying to deceive and use everyone around you." Margaret's indignant screams could probably be heard down the block, but Tom remained unmoved. He gave her a deadline to vacate the house, and true to his word, he sold it soon after. We later learned that Margaret had moved into the apartment left to her by her lover, evicting the current tenants and having to pay a hefty sum for breaking their lease. She tried calling Tom a few times after that, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations, but we stood firm in our decision to cut ties. As the dust settled from this tumultuous period, Tom and I found ourselves looking toward the future. And what a future it was shaping up to be. I was pregnant. We decided to sell our apartment and look for a small house, somewhere we could raise our child in peace, away from the shadows of the past. We were careful not to let any news of the pregnancy or our plans to move reach Margaret. The last thing we wanted was for her to find a way back into our lives, especially with a baby on the way. Driving away toward our new home and new life, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew Tom and I would face them together, stronger for having weathered this storm.